Now, South Africa's called for transformation change as the Summit of the Future kicked off at the United Nations headquarters in New York, addressing an interactive dialogue on transforming global governance and turbocharging the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Minister in the Presidency responsible for planning, monitoring and evaluation, Maropene Ramokgopa, highlighted the need to human solidarity, particularly for developing while also addressing conflicts. She's urged and argued that South Africa had a leadership role to play.
Human solidarity is needed now more than ever at a time of great tension between the major powers, conflict situations and unconstitutional changes to government in some countries, including in Africa. We need transformational change. South Africa has a leadership role in the global conversation on the urgent need to transform the global political and security structures, including the United Nations. We need African and other developing countries to take their rightful place in global governance and respect for the UN Charter and its principles of non-interference in internal affairs of countries and respect for the sovereignty and territorial dignity of all nations. South Africa is also leading the call for a fundamental transformation of the global financial architecture to make it fit for purpose in supporting the Sustainable Development Goals. There is also a need to realize dedicated financial resources to implement international agreements inter alia, the multilateral environmental agreements and the Climate Change Convention and its Paris Agreement, which includes how the just transition pathways selected by countries based on their national circumstances are supported to mitigate the negative impact and it could have a developing countries.
Banning the conversation, our UN correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease joins us now with the latest from New York. Sherwin, a very good evening to you. So we have this new pact or political declaration that is the culmination of years-long processes to adapt international cooperation for the realities of today, right? To make it better able to address the complex challenges that face humanity. Perhaps let's expand a little bit here. Give us a few more examples of what this pact essentially seeks to achieve.
A years-long process indeed, Mpho, but a negotiation that lasted about 9 months, essentially the length of a woman's pregnancy, right? And so we have this little baby called the Pact of the Future with addendums called the Global Digital Compact and this Declaration for Future Generations, a voluminous document that really tries to reconfigure how the multilateral institutions, be that the United Nations, be that the Security Council, be that the various development banks, the financial institutions known as the Bretton Woods institutions, how they are geared towards addressing the complex challenges that face humanity today. Be that the proliferation of nuclear weapons, be that the proliferation of conflicts around the world, the inability to arrest those conflicts. One thinks of the situation in Gaza and just how difficult the international security apparatus that is geared towards resolving and fixing conflicts is simply not able to meet the moment. Gaza is one example, Ukraine is another example. Sudan is the newest example where we can't get these two generals to sit around the peace negotiating table and find a path forward, not just for themselves, but for the millions of people that have created, in Sudan, that has created the largest humanitarian crisis anywhere in the world. So let me give you some examples under the themes in this pact. There's one theme called peace and security, another is sustainable development, climate change, digital cooperation, the issue of human rights, gender, youth, future generations. Under peace and security, they talk about the most progressive and concrete commitments to Security Council reform since the 1960s. They talk about the agreement to strengthen international frameworks that govern outer space, including a clear commitment to prevent an arms race in outer space. They talk about steps to avoid the weaponization and misuse of technologies, particularly new autonomous weapons that somehow can decide by themselves how to, when to fire, not to fire without human interaction. They need guardrails around that. Then on sustainable development, the entire pact, we are told, is designed to turbocharge implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. You and I both have talked about this, right? The implementation of the targets related to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals are currently only at 17%, 17 implemented, with 6 years to go before that voluminous pact that was adopted by member states in 2015, known as the SDG agenda, the 2030 agenda, is going to come to its deadline in 2030. So time is running out. It talks about reforming the international financial architecture to give developing countries a greater say in how decisions are taken in terms of international financial institutions, in terms of concepts like common but differentiated responsibilities. When you talk about the climate change agreement, the Paris Climate Change Agreement, the responsibility of developed countries to fund the renewable transition and the green transition that needs to happen in developing countries, mobilizing more financing from multilateral development banks to help development countries implement those agendas. And then on digital cooperation, the Digital Compact is the first global comprehensive framework that addresses things like the future that is artificial intelligence and robotics, right? This is a new space for so many countries, in particular smaller developing countries that don't have the means, like a United States or a European Union collective, that is able to come up with guardrails and invest money where it needs to go. So this framework is really about greater digital cooperation so that we don't exacerbate the existing digital divide, but we reduce that divide. And then just on two more others, youth and future generations, the first ever declaration on future generations with concrete steps to take account of future generations in the decision making we make now. This is all about the future. And so we have this document now in Mpho. The big question is, will member states implement? Implementation is often where the theoretical side of things falls short. Theory is, it looks good on paper. There's a wonderful pact that tells us all sorts of wonderful things about our future. The question is, will member states now begin to implement that in their jurisdictions, in their national countries, in their regional countries? That is where the rubber hits the road, and that is what needs to happen now.
Yeah, absolutely. More so as we heard President Cyril Ramaphosa speaking about how action will be imperative at this stage in time, and also just really talking about how, you know, others who've weighed in saying that they're hoping that it goes beyond being just a talk shop. Now, we're also, as you speak about the youth, we heard the president talking about how this pact must essentially bridge the development divide and provide practical solutions to the challenges of today and tomorrow, because this is all about creating a sustainable future for the young generation. Isn't that so?
Absolutely right. I mean, just look at the high levels of unemployment facing youth across Africa, in South Africa in particular, but also across the world. These three documents that were adopted under the Pact of the Future is essentially girded towards ensuring that there is a sustainable future for young people. That really is at the core of these deliberations. And in the adoption, in that opening session earlier today here in the UN General Assembly, we also heard from youth representatives. There was a gentleman from Qatar, someone living with a disability. He suffers from caudal regression syndrome. Essentially, it's a disease that doesn't allow the lower body to grow. And then we also heard from a former South Sudanese refugee who left South Sudan, fled Sudan, the war there, as a teenager, went to Nairobi, where she studied at the University of Nairobi before winning a scholarship to study in Berlin. These were two of the speakers in that opening session, along with the Secretary General, President of the General Assembly. This is what they had to say. Watch.
Before you here today, proudly representing hope from yesterday's dreams, which will continue to carry me to my future. I have been raised with strong family values, where our home model was built on believing in yourself to manifest confidence for your future. As a person with disability, I have learned that true progress comes not from overcoming personal challenges alone, but from how we, as a society, embrace each other's differences. As I look around the room, I don't see anyone else like me. But you have accepted my differences without prejudice, gender, nationality, race, or religion. You have accepted all of me. This must be the way we conduct our tomorrow, where inclusivity is a fundamental right, not a luxury, where every individual can contribute to the common good of the future.
Education is crucial for sustainable growth. We must ensure that education is accessible, equitable, and aligned with the future workforce demands. And for this, I want governments and key stakeholders in the education sector to think big on funding for education. In a world where world leaders openly make negative comments about refugees, none of us chose to be a refugee, and anyone can become a refugee. Without peace, there can be no safety nor development. Without security, there can be no stability. Without stability, education falters and nations fail. As we embark on this journey, let's envision a world and a future where it is shaped by cooperations, understanding, and shared purpose.
A very powerful delivery when it comes to young people on the power of inclusivity and, of course, education. But what we do know as we look ahead at President Cyril Ramaphosa's next few days, Sherwin, in New York, is that there will be a really big focus on the economy tomorrow ahead of the annual general debate in the General Assembly on Tuesday. What more is on the agenda, and is this really a debate?
Yeah, so the general debate in the General Assembly where he will deliver South Africa's country statement will happen on Tuesday, but he will be stepping away from UN activities to focus on national priorities on Monday, tomorrow, and essentially a big focus on the economy. I'll just give you a quick run through. He'll start the morning with a roundtable, and this is the title of that discussion, Navigating a New Landscape for African Minerals. You well know that as we transition to a renewable future, green technology, at the core of this race is going to be who can access the minerals and rare minerals, the lithiums and cobalts and manganese and copper, to mention a few, that are required for the chips of the future, the technologies that we are going to use in the future, the robotics. And so there is a great deal of interest in countries that have a lot of these minerals within their domains, and South Africa is among those. And so understanding what beneficiation means and really imposing that notion on investors that if you want to invest in our country, there has to be added value to the communities from whence those minerals are coming, right? So beneficiation has to undergird future engagement on how people invest in our countries. And so there'll be a discussion on that. And then later he'll also have a roundtable with businesses at the New York Stock Exchange. We understand that he will get a tour of the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. So very much an engagement focused on South Africa's economy. He will also meet with a group, a non-profit called the Business Council for International Understanding. Now, I had never heard of this group before, but I Googled them, and they call themselves a strategic partner for businesses and governments. They're a non-profit comprised of policy experts, strategic advisors, trade educators offering commercial diplomacy services. So you're seeing this link between the economy and trade and diplomacy, and one understands there's a lot to take out of that in terms of what South Africa's diplomats around the world. We have 3 missions in the United States, 1 in Los Angeles, 1 in Washington, D.C., a consulate here in New York, and the importance of those diplomats being able to speak the language that will speak to what South Africa wants in terms of trade, but also the diplomacy that comes with that. So very much a focus on South Africa's economy, and we'll be there every step of the way with President Ramaphosa and his delegation on Monday.
Before we let you go, Sherwin, one notable moment at Tuesday's opening assembly meeting is the likelihood that this could be U.S. President Joe Biden's final major appearance on the world stage, right?
Absolutely right. This will be his swan song, certainly here at the United Nations. We also understand that heads of state and government have been invited to some sort of farewell, where the media, of course, isn't invited, to bid farewell to President Biden. Of course, he has a few months left in office after his seismic decision in late June of this year to step out and not seek re-election. Of course, cue his Vice President Kamala Harris, who, of course, then very quickly became the Democratic presidential nominee. There was also a lot of speculation that Kamala Harris might put in an appearance here, to sort of dip her toe in the waters here in terms of international diplomacy. But she's very much engaged in a domestic issue, which is called the U.S. election right now. And of course, the polls indicate a very tight race. So it's going to be all President Biden. Antony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, will be accompanying him. We also understand that the U.S. will be hosting a high-level meeting in terms of discussions around ending the conflict in Sudan. There will also be a high-level meeting hosted by the United States on the situation in Haiti. So President Biden, while he's still in office, will certainly have his hands full when he certainly gives his address on Tuesday morning. He'll be the second speaker after Brazil on Tuesday, Biden's final address to the UN General Assembly on Tuesday.
Very well. Thank you so much, Sherwin Bryce-Pease, joining us from the on the latest in New York as all the big conversations take place. Our UN correspondent.